All right. So everybody, thanks so much for listening. If you're listening to us on YouTube, please subscribe. Or if you're also listening to us on one of the podcasting sites, also subscribe so we can get this out to as many people as possible. If you're listening to us on one of the radio stations, we greatly appreciate you listening, and keep telling your friends and your family members about this show. We greatly appreciate that too. All right. So we do have Wendy Leonard on. She is a registered dietitian nutritionalist on today, and she is going to be talking on many things. We know the coronavirus is still around us, and obviously you have to keep your vitamin D up, your zinc, and many other things. Lose some weight. That's the big thing too, for a lot of people. And you should have some success in living a good, healthy, safe lifestyle. And she's going to be talking about that and many other things. But Wendy, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time tonight.
Yeah, of course. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
So what made you want to go into this field in the first place?
Let's see. So my dad was really into nutrition when I was growing up. He was kind of ahead of his time. He took a class on his own when he was in his 30s, when we were young kids. And so he changed everything within our house, and we grew up on whole wheat bread, and we didn't have much sugar and treats in the house. And he was always adding like wheat germ to our foods, and we always had lots of vegetables and fruit. So, it was always really important to him. So I grew up eating really healthy. And then I was a runner when I was in high school, and I wasn't very good. And so, I was kind of like holding up the back. And so I started just looking into nutrition for athletes, and I revamped my diet, cleaned it up a bit. And I went from last on the team to not the first, but I was in the top 5, which was a big high
Pretty
school.
good.
So, yeah. And I felt so much better too. So I lost a little weight, and, it just really, it just gave me a competitive edge. So that was where my interest really sparked. And then it's carried with me into my adult years.
With that said, what do you feel like the obesity crisis in this country is from? Is it because of these companies they just promote junk to children? Even in the schools, it's junk for children to eat. Is that it? That it starts at a young age with the McDonald's playhouses? I don't know if there's many of those anymore, but I remember.
COVID. I think they shut those down during COVID, but
you're right, probably.
Yeah. So there's something called obesogens. I don't know if you've heard of that, or your audience would have, but it's really interesting because basically there are things that and this is research-based, there are things in our food that are changing our hormones. And these are the hormones that are affecting, and when you think of hormones, you think of testosterone and estrogen, but hormones are also insulin, which is a metabolic hormone that regulates blood glucose levels. Cortisol is a stress hormone. That's what we feel when, we go on a podcast and we're being interviewed. You get that stress hormone, which is a normal hormone, but when it's out of control, it can be something negative and harmful. So there's lots of different hormones. There's also a hormone called ghrelin, and there's another one called leptin. Ghrelin is, I like a memory clue is like, like I'm hungry, I need to eat something right now. And then leptin is the hormone that tells you when you're full. So like the end of your Thanksgiving feast, you're like, whew, all right, I've had enough. That's leptin. Or just like that feeling that you get, your brain is like, yeah, I'm done. That's leptin. A lot of these food additives that are still considered safe, like they're generally recognized as safe in the United States, they're approved of for food companies to use, they are affecting our hormone levels. They are affecting our ghrelin, our leptin, our insulin, etc. And one of the ways is it's confusing us so that we don't know when we're full and we're hungry. And so, that's a big part of it. Like when I work with patients, a lot of times, like they don't even know what it feels like to feel full sometimes. And that is really because of some of these hormones that aren't working properly. And that's something that happens, that's because of our food supply. There's a lot of other factors too. For example, just that we're not as active as we used to be. My kids, they're, on their electronics a lot of time. They're not as active as they used to be. So that's kind of a generational thing, like just a lot more electronics, a lot less physical activity than we used to have. So that's another thing as well. Even sleep, we're a lot more stressed out. We're a lot more sleep deprived than we used to be. The average teenager, I think, is getting like 6.5 or 7 hours, whereas before it was 8 to 10 hours. Right. And a lot of that is electronics driven, and that can affect weight too. That cortisol level goes up, and that in turn affects your metabolic, your insulin, and become insulin resistance over time with that too.
What about, and we were just speaking about hormones, and we hear that in the milk, with cows now. And I know that if you go to some grocery stores, they do have the label on saying, there's no added hormones. They don't put RB, ST. You can correct me if that's not the correct. A lot of different things they're adding. Yeah. All different things that they're feeding these cows that aren't in some of these places where they pump the milk, but a lot of them do have that. So we have that, and we just had a woman on a little while ago, and she was speaking about the meat and what we feed, the cattle, the pigs, and in these situations that these animals are living in are so stressed out, and all the antibiotics that they give these animals, that eventually we're eating these. And then when we get sick, because we have all these antibiotics in our system, whether we like it or not, eventually it's really going to hurt us in the long run. Are you hearing about these problems already? Are you seeing this?
Yeah. So one way I think that's really coming out is if you think about someone who takes antibiotics, sometimes you have to, right?
Correct.
It can be really bad if you have an infection and it goes untreated. But if you end up taking frequent antibiotics, or even as a child, when you're developing that microbiome, that bacterial balance in your gut, your GI tract, every time you have an antibiotic, it wipes out all that bacteria. They're trying to wipe out all the bad bacteria, but one of the side effects is you're going to be wiping out the good bacteria too. So when that happens, you do lose your ability to, fight infection. That makes up a healthy immune system to have a good balanced microbiome. So you're wiping that out every time you're on antibiotics. Since we are on the food chain, yes, it's getting, we're consuming it, but I think one of the biggest factors we're overlooking is, if you're consuming, animal protein that has been pumped full of antibiotics, then you're consuming that each time, that might be every day or multiple times per day. But basically, it's like you are chronically on antibiotics and really messing up your bacterial balance in your gut. Another thing too, which I think is interesting, and this is even for, plant-based foods, a lot of the chemicals that we're using, like the pesticides and the herbicides, things like that, and anti-mold sprays, and you see the need for it. We're mass producing food for, a lot of people. And I know, my dad has a farm, and I'm like, Dad, is that organic? Like, is that organic wheat out there? And he's like, I tried the organic wheat, Wendy, and it died. Like, of course not, So it's true. Like, organic farming is very difficult, and, not to put the pesticides and the herbicides on there, you lose a lot of crop, and that's why it's more expensive. But some of these pesticides they're using, what they actually are doing is affecting the microbiome of the pest, so of the bug, and that's how they're killing it, right? So they are spraying our crops, for example, with something that when the pest ingests it, when the bug ingests this pesticide, the way that it's killing it is by affecting its microbiome so that it dies.
So what is the best way, if you do buy food that has pesticides, which, like you said, Wendy, the majority has it, is there a way, like whether it's fruits or vegetables, to try to rinse all that junk off?
Yeah, that's hard to do, right? Because if you think, some of the foods that have the highest amount of pesticides, for example, are berries, right?
Yeah.
So you can't really rinse those off. But a good resource is the Environmental Working Group. So they have a great website. I think it's ewg.org. But if you just Google Environmental Working Group, they're such a great organization. They do a lot of research, and they're not bought out by anyone at all. They're independent, but they do a lot of research. So one of the things they do is every year they do the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15, and they examine our produce and they rank it with the highest level of pesticide on down. So typically those are the same foods every year, because some foods you're going to need to spray more than others. If you go on a farm or to an orchard or go to pick berries in the summer, you'll see, some crops are going to attract more bugs than others. So they're going to have to spray them more. So, but things like berries and they're pretty high in pesticides. So like when I look at the Environmental Working Group, or I tell a patient, like, this is, if you want to be smart about things, but also don't break the bank, follow that list. Those are the ones where it's most important to get organic, those Dirty Dozen. But then they also have a Clean 15. So refer to the Clean 15, and that's where you can buy like conventional. So things like, for example, avocados or bananas, you really don't need to buy organic. They're very clean. A lot of, you do have the peel, so that protects it on some level too. So, but that's where I would kind of send people to, because it is expensive to buy organic. But I would say it's worth it. And sometimes you'll eat less because of it. Your portions will get smaller because you're like, oh my gosh, I just paid, $15 for that little 3-ounce grass-fed steak or something, organic steak. But
all right, for everybody listening, again, this is Wendy Leonard here on Fire Breathing Rob. Definitely check her out, and her website is www.rinutritiontherapy.com. Again, rinutritiontherapy.com. So as far as COVID goes, there was a lot of people, and I argue with people all the time about this. COVID is real, but the majority of people that specifically died because of COVID is smaller than the people that died because they had COVID and other comorbidities that made it worse.
Right.
As a person that's a nutritionist, you see all this stuff all the time. And we've heard all this misinformation in the news media, online about, and I got to give it to down in Florida where I was at, they had it correct. And I know everybody made fun of everybody down there. It's vitamin D, it's zinc, it's, working out, no shutdowns. Anyway, that's a lot of that's another story for another day. But what did you think about all this COVID? Because as a person that's a nutritionalist, the shutdowns, the not working out, these doctors should have been saying people need to still work out. People need to keep getting all their vitamins, all their minerals, and we need to keep our health together, lose some weight. No one was saying anything. There was just fixation on getting a vaccine and staying indoors, which led to mental illness too in people.
Oh yeah, the mental illness. Yes, I know. Unbelievable. And, just the other day, I was listening to something about Alzheimer's and dementia, and we know that starts well before the first signs of it, right? Like we know that begins like 10 years before you actually symptomatically have Alzheimer's, where people are like, okay, here it is. So, and, looking at that research, one of the biggest factors for Alzheimer's is loneliness.
Yeah.
So, and not loneliness where, you know, it's like that internal loneliness. So you could even like be hanging out with people, but you're like lonely, you're not connected, right? And so that is one of the biggest things that I found, like, I'm, you know, just people being so isolated. And we'll see in 10 years, like how that really plays out. I mean, we're already, you know, it's an aging population anyway. So, and we don't have the medical staff to take care of the geriatric population. And now on top of that, what this is, you know, the long-term outcomes. So I think the fear, and that's what a lot, you know, that's what a lot of this is, right? And think about fear and anxiety and how much that affects our health, right?
Yeah.
Like, and a lot of it is like, you know, I mean, for me, I'm like, all right, so like, if I get sick and die, you know, I mean, not that I have a death wish, but it's like, why, you know, why is there so much fear around this? This is kind of like a natural process, you know, and granted, I'm not like 80 years old and, you know, having a lot of comorbidities, but I do have parents and we've all, like all of us, like I made it through COVID. I have 4 children. They all had COVID. They were all they were all vaccinated. My parents were not vaccinated. They're elderly. They both made it. My dad was like back on the farm 3 days later. This was at the beginning before the vaccines were even out. Like he's, you know, he was fine. So, but not everyone's like that. But I think the anxiety around it, right? Like has a lot to do with how, like if you're so worried about getting something and then you get it, like this is a life sentence, that anxiety affects your immune system. So, you know, how much of that is even anxiety driven? But, you know, what I've seen, you know, even with the drink, like alcohol intake and the liver transplant list has increased 60% during COVID. So now they're, you know, probably working on getting livers from animals. That's what they're doing with the cardiac transplant.
I saw that with the pig liver. Yeah.
Right. So, but regardless, yeah. So in the New England states where we are and you are right now, vitamin D is huge, right? Now, vitamin D we get from the sun. So as much as you can, try to get out into the sun. But, you know, and you can get it from food sources as well. And food, I always promote like food. If you can get it from food, do, because that's going to be your best source. But vitamin D is very difficult for, especially in these darker, less sunny areas. So you really do have to supplement. And, you know, there's the 50,000 IUs that for the vitamin D2 that some of the doctors will put on a prescription, but you still need the sun to convert D2 to D3. So I just tell my patients, do D3, you know, can do 5,000. Some doctors will recommend 10,000 of D3 daily, but you don't want to have D by itself. You want to have the K2 with it as well, because that will help you mineralize the D. Otherwise, it could just be kind of free floating and you can have problems. So I always combine the D3 with the K2. Vitamin C is another one. I mean, that's an immune antioxidant. And you can that's a great one to get from foods, right? So like the biggest one is your citrus fruits. So that's a great source. And then, you know, but also zinc. So a lot of people are deficient in zinc. There's like a quick and easy little zinc test that you can do as well. You can buy liquid zinc. I have it. I think I left it at the office, but you can take like a dropper full of that and put it in 4 ounces of water, mix it up and hold, like take a little sip, hold it in your mouth. And basically if it tastes metallic and kind of gross, then you're okay on zinc. But if it tastes like sweet and you're like, oh, this is good, that means you're zinc deficient. So that's actually easier than doing a zinc test, a serum blood test, because that's pretty inaccurate. So the quick and easy is like, just get a little zinc sulfate and do that zinc test. But zinc, if you're deficient in that, you can be immunocompromised. And some people, I've actually had people with like sores in their mouth, like if they get canker sores, that's another sign of deficiency, or an aversion to meat. Some people, you know, like can have an aversion to meat, and that can be normal, especially if you think of animal, cruelty and things like that. You're just like, ah. But it can also be a sign of a zinc deficiency if you have almost that like repulsion towards meat. So sometimes if I have a patient who has expressed that, I'll think about zinc as a deficiency as well. And we burn through a lot of these vitamins and minerals, if we're stressed, or if we're, not sleeping, or if we're fighting a cold or a virus. So, making sure you get those in your diet. And if you're not getting them in your diet, I always recommend especially supplement with the vitamin D3, 5,000 I use per day, plus the K2. The vitamin C, if you can take that as a supplement. And I always recommend like a B complex as well, just to cover all the B vitamins. And then a good probiotic too. So, and I won't offer any specific ones, but, with probiotics, most people tend to feel better on a probiotic. Rarely do people feel, worse, but if that does happen, I'm always like, all right, stop the probiotic. But, and another thing is fermented foods too. So that's kind of, a little more popular these days with people, like fermentation of foods to work on the good gut bacteria as well. But you have to already be healthy to add those fermented products to your diet.
Wendy, what about like a 1 a day woman, 1 a day men? Are those worth taking or no?
Yeah. I mean, those, just if it's a matter of like, you're at CVS and it's like, maybe I'll get one because it's here, that's fine. There are some that are a little bit better. I mean, right. A lot of times you'll have fillers and different things in there that, aren't really necessary or aren't the healthiest things. But so, there's a few brands that I like Orthomolecular and Pure Encapsulations. Okay. Thorn is another good one. Zymogen. Nordic Naturals is a good one as well. So there's some that I really like and that I feel comfortable using for myself and for my family. And, when it comes to like the gummies with the sugar and stuff like that, I'm not a huge fan of that. But if it's like someone who can't swallow pills, or they're like, they can't get their kids to have something, I'm like, all right. But then there's some like Nordic Naturals has like the gummies for kids and it doesn't have sugar in it. It's, all natural, and they still make them taste pretty good.
For the people that are listening, what would you tell them if they had a vaccine injury? And there are a lot of people that have had some vaccine injuries that have had those severe reactions to the vaccine. How can they get rid of those? Is there a detox? What would you do for your patient?
So what I would say is this, because, it's done, right? Like you had whoever this was, they had the vaccine. You really can't like look back and beat yourself up or over it. Like it happened, right? Like we all made decisions that we thought were the best. And so hindsight 2020, right? It could happen, like anything could happen with anything, right? So first thing, like, cause it's going to make it worse, stop beating yourself up for doing what you thought was right at the time. It's fine. And then also understanding that the body can heal. Right. So if you had a reaction, that doesn't mean like, and I'm just saying kind of across the board because, I don't know exactly what everyone's reaction is, but when it comes to what I've seen in my office with patients having reactions after the vaccine, you have to think of the body as the body wants to heal. The body wants to thrive. You just have to give it what it needs in order to do that. And that's not always easy, especially in the Western world where it's minimized, maybe like that you did have a reaction, or it's all in your head, or they don't know what to do about it. So it's not really acknowledged or even documented, or no one's trying to figure anything out, right? So, but what you're doing, and this could happen with any vaccine, right?
Correct.
Are introducing something to the body. And, you don't know, and not whether it's live or dead virus, you don't know how your body's going to react. A lot of this has to do with your immune system, right? A lot of people right now have autoimmune problems, autoimmune disorders or diseases, right? Where the body is overreacting to environmental triggers, right? And they could be normal triggers like pollen, right? Grass,
Right.
or a food, or something topical, like the body's overreacting, or a dog, right?
Yeah.
So, the body's supposed to respond to environmental factors if it's dangerous, right? So if you have you eat something and it's bad, or you drink some water that was contaminated and there was a parasite in it, right? Or, bacteria, viruses, parasites, all of these things, right? Then your body's supposed to react. That's why you get a fever. That's your immune response trying to kill something, or you vomit to get rid of something, or you have, goes out the other end. So your body's reacting with the immune system, which is a normal response. What I'm finding is you're having so it's patients who tend to have, an overreaction. And so their immune system is like an overdrive, and then they're having some type of, like it's an inflammation. And it can be kind of genetically where you're most vulnerable for, or if you've had something in the past, like you had, you were on a lot of antibiotics for something, or you at one point traveled overseas and had a parasite and infection and it was treated and you're fine, but then this happened and kind of like re-stimulated the whole, body. So a lot of this is like calming down the body. And how do you do that? Well, you do a lot of those things where you're talking about at the beginning, kind of clean things up, like avoid as many chemicals as you can, and whether it's in your food or things that this is like your second mouth, right? Your skin. So what you put on your skin gets into your blood system and circulates throughout. So, and what you breathe in, right? Like we can only avoid so much, but we're constantly being exposed to things. So, but the body doesn't know what to do with it, especially when you're ingesting something, it's trying to protect your body. So, you do want to kind of clean up the diet, taking like even over the counter medications, right? Like the body has to deal with that. So, so trying to do your best to eat a more whole foods, organic when you can, avoiding those hormones, those antibiotics, trying to minimize the amount of over-the-counter or prescription medication that you're taking, because even though sometimes you need that, the body's still like, what is it? Anytime your body is like, what is this? And what do I do with it? And when you think of food and you can't read those ingredients on there, you're consuming that and your body's doing the same thing. Like, what is this? This isn't food. This isn't from the earth. This is like a chemical. And so it reacts to it as though it's a pathogen, right? With inflammation, because it's not food to the body. So one thing is cleaning it up, the best that you can. But I had a lot of GI patients that they had a reaction after, whether it was like the second shot or the booster was a big one for people. And whether it was something in the booster or whether it was like, here we go again, here's another exposure to something that your body doesn't like,
thanks.
right?
No thanks for a booster. No thanks.
Yeah. And there's some ingredients in these, like emulsifiers, right, that they're adding. And, Johnson & Johnson versus Pfizer versus Moderna, they're using different ingredients, but like polysorbate 80 is an emulsifier that a lot of people have a allergic reaction to.
So hold on, let's backtrack. I'm sorry to interrupt you. So what is that? A
Polysorbate?
Yeah, what is that for people that don't know?
That's an emulsifier. So an emulsifier is when you're taking two liquids basically that don't mix, like think oil and water, right?
Oh, okay.
Or think peanut butter, the natural peanut butter where you have like the oil and then the peanut butter, right? And then you think of the Skippy over here, that's already together, right? So the food industry, or whoever it is, like they took that peanut butter where it would have separated and they emulsified it so that it's nice and like blended together. So these are things that the body does, right? The body is used to doing it. It's used to, in the stomach, emulsifying the fat so that it's nice and blended before it can be digested. Mm-hmm. So the less processed, the better, right? Because the body's like, what is that? Why is that already like that? It should be separate. But so polysorbate 80 is an emulsifier. It's what the company has added as one of the agents to blend that together. So it's not separate.
Okay, I didn't even know that. Because I was told by a lot of people that a lot of the ingredients that are in these vaccines are under wraps. No one knows.
Oh, well, they're fine to tell you polysorbate is in there because it's in other things too. But we also know that the body, we can test to see how the body reacts to that. And people do have those IgG, and they have the allergic reaction too, but IgG is an immune reaction in the gut and in other cells in the body where the immune system is reacting. So if you're injecting that into your body versus like it's bothering you when you consume it, right? Because it's in some foods and people react to that. But if you're injecting it, then, that can have another effect as well. So what can you do about that, right? So do everything you can to calm down the body, right? The immune system, reduce the inflammation in the body.
Mm-hmm. So are you talking about doing any kind of detox? We've heard a lot about that lately. Is that something you're involved in or no?
Yeah, I do have a couple things. Like one thing that I'm a fan of, and this was after doing a lot of research, is fasting. And what I like is the fasting mimicking diet because it doesn't put you under the same stress as a water fast. The fasting mimicking diet is 5 days of reduced intake calorically. The breakdown of macronutrients is still about still healthy as far as what I recommend for my patients with eating normally. But the calorie level for day 1 is around 1100, and then it's around 700 day 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a vegetarian based. There's no meat products. I eat meat normally, but during the fast, it's vegetarian. Lots of fluid. No alcohol. You try to get off caffeine, but if you need caffeine, you can have 1 cup of black coffee or regular tea. But I really like that. And I had, when I had COVID, I had it over Christmas. Mm-hmm. I was one of those people that lost my sense of smell and taste. And on day 3 of doing my 5-day fast, it came back. And day 3 is where you get that autophagy, autophagy is where your cells are basically cleaning out, you are detoxing at that point. So I really like that. Other things, if you don't want to go the fasting mimicking route, glutathione is another supplement that you can take. Some doctors will nebulize with it. Some doctors will do IVs, but you can take glutathione supplements, or you can take something called N-acetylcysteine or NAC. NAC converts over to glutathione and it crosses the blood-brain barrier. So taking NAC, the N-acetylcysteine, for a couple, 2 months, and I would do probably a dose of 1,200 to 1,800 milligrams of NAC per day. And that's a good detox, like a natural, that's what your body uses anyways to detox, is glutathione. You're just helping it out a little bit more. Okay. So I do like glutathione for that. And another thing, if someone has to have the vaccine, I usually would say if you're going to about a week before, you want to take the glutathione daily and then take it for a week after. And I also recommend taking some Benadryl too before you get that. So probably a couple days before, the day of, and a couple days after. And I have seen patients who had a reaction to one of the vaccines follow that protocol and not have a reaction the next time.
as we go to the end of the interview, for people that just started tuning in, this is Wendy Leonard, and she is at Rhode Island Nutrition Therapy. Again, rinutritiontherapy.com. Wendy, what do you hope people learn from our interview today?
I guess what I'd love for them to take is like that the body can heal, right? So whatever you have, whatever symptoms you have, whatever conditions, diseases, etc., like the body is meant to heal and thrive. And sometimes it just takes some work. And, you know, but there's a lot that you can do with nutrition and lifestyle, healthy foods, in order to heal the body from the inside out. And, you know, I have a patient, like just one example of this patient, this woman that had been on omeprazole, right, for like 30 years. And she had all these GI problems, and the doctor, like, you know, she went to a gastroenterologist and her regular primary care, and everyone's like, it's just irritable bowel. You're, you know, just basically you're fine. Just live with it, or take this medication, or, you know, but I was like, first of all, you're having problems on the lower part of the GI tract because you've been for 30 years taking something to fix the reflux and without changing your diet, right? So let's get you off the omeprazole, figure out what's triggering your reflux, and heal your GI tract from the stomach down, right? So I have a protocol I do with patients to get them off of omeprazole. Omeprazole is a proton pump inhibitor that people take who have chronic reflux, right? Like heartburn. But the side effects are increased risk for stomach cancer, right? And nutrient malabsorption, because it's your stomach acid is a lower pH, it's more alkaline, so it's not breaking down the food. So then the food goes down into the small intestines in larger particles and never gets fully broken down. So we got her off of that, and then she was food journaling. We figured out her triggers, right? Mm-hmm. So the ice cream, the cheese, the alcohol, so like the gluten, but she could have it in some amounts, right? So it forced her. So often we're taking a medication that's masking our ability, like masking symptoms, so that we can't make changes to naturally heal our bodies, right? So so she was so frustrated, like, I can't have this, I can't have that, you know, I can't have a, you know, drink with my friends and my husband, and, you know, and I'm not saying like, you know, that's fine, you can, you just have to weigh out the, you know, but in the end, you know, it's a journey to healing and being healthy and taking off like the blinders and having to look at like, and do a little work, but ultimately she probably will live a better, higher quality life and for longer, because she has fixed something, because she's acknowledged what was causing the problem instead of masking it with a medication.
Correct. You know, Wendy, I really appreciate your time today. Again, for people that are listening, this was Wendy Leonard. Definitely check her website out. It's RI Nutritional Therapy. I mean, you've heard the wealth of information that she's preached here today. And we're very grateful to have you on, and we hope to have you on again soon, Wendy. Thanks so much for your time today. Greatly appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rob.